I remember the exact moment I realized I wasn't married to my wife anymore. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. It was a Thursday, 3 weeks before the quarterly audit, and she handed me a manila envelope in her office, her polished nails tapping lightly against the cardstock as if each click were a tiny verdict. Inside was an NDA, a severance package, and a line that felt like it had been laser-etched into my chest. Take the money, disappear. This protects us both. At that moment, I felt a strange clarity. She wasn't offering a divorce. She wasn't even offering a fair exit. She was trying to erase me, my name, my work, my existence within the company I had devoted 11 years of my life to, all scrubbed clean as if I'd never mattered. And the kicker? The money on the table wouldn't have saved me. It would have bought my silence. I folded the papers carefully, almost reverently, and slid them back into the envelope. My hands didn't shake, not yet. There was still work to do, work she couldn't imagine I'd ever do. It had started months before, subtle enough that I almost ignored it. Evelyn, my wife, and the CEO of the company where I'd built my career from the ground up, introduced a new transparency initiative. In her public emails, she wrote about the executive conflict of interest disclosure policy in glowing terms. Words like integrity, accountability, and corporate stewardship littered the memo like confetti. But the policy was a wolf in sheep's clothing. For everyone else, it was advisory. For me, it was mandatory. Every meeting, every decision, every project I touched suddenly required explicit approvals I had previously signed off on as part of my architect duties. My permissions were temporarily downgraded, she said, in a tone that suggested this was routine housekeeping. I remember walking past the server room that morning, the hum of the cooling fans vibrating through the floor, and noticing a camera angle that had shifted slightly. Not enough to see me in private, but just enough to remind me that she now had eyes everywhere. Every access log, every audit trail, every keystroke, it all fed into her narrative of control. At home, I tried to voice my concerns over dinner. The cutlery clinked. The wine breathed in the decanter. Daniel, I'm not questioning your contributions. This is about consistency, she said, rehearsed. The words were polished, the tone measured, but the meaning was clear. Your input is no longer valued. That was Incident A, the hairline crack. My access, my authority, even my presence in meetings I designed and led were being quietly eroded. And yet she maintained the illusion of partnership, of love, of mutual respect. A month later, the first public humiliation arrived. The board was convened for an audit readiness presentation, and I was expecting to walk them through the compliance architecture I had built, the dashboard that traced every executive decision, the alerts that preempted regulatory violations, the permission hierarchies that I had meticulously coded to prevent the exact kind of manipulation Evelyn was now attempting. Instead, she took the stage, smiled, and said, "This is the new system we recently streamlined internally." No mention of me. My contribution erased with a flick of her pen, or in this case, her tongue. When a board member asked me a question about a rare exception I had built for a particularly thorny SEC regulation, she interrupted, answering incorrectly, not aggressively, just casually, almost lovingly, and yet the damage was surgical. My credibility, painstakingly built over more than a decade, was undermined in 5 words. 2 days later, I was reassigned. My office, once a neutral command center with floor-to-ceiling windows and a quiet view of the corporate park, was now an advisory cubicle tucked between human resources and junior marketing. A junior manager I had personally trained became my direct supervisor. I watched my influence evaporate like condensation on a cold window. Colleagues began avoiding me in the hallways, small nods replaced with awkward smiles. Every detail mattered in that moment. The angle of the ceiling lights in my new cubicle, the way the hum of fluorescent bulbs made each keystroke feel amplified, the subtle placement of HR memos in my inbox, all a reminder that my professional life was being poisoned methodically. Then came the final blow, the one that forced my hand. Evelyn fabricated a risk exposure incident, a vulnerability that, according to altered internal logs, I had allegedly ignored. She even went as far as having the system show that I bypassed executive approvals. HR delivered the ultimatum: resign immediately, sign an NDA, take a severance package, or be terminated for cause, with regulatory reporting. I remember the office that day, the expensive leather chairs, the faint scent of jasmine from the diffusers, the way sunlight cut through the polished conference table. She slid the papers toward me with a casual smile, as though this were a simple business transaction. "Take the money, disappear. This protects us both," she said again. I didn't answer. I sat back, studying the memo. The font was off, Calibri 11 PT, whereas every official compliance document was Arial 10.5 PT with the corporate blue watermark, #1F4ED78. A small detail, but in my world, details were everything. I noticed the slight misalignment in the headers, the lack of audit trail in the time-stamped logs. This wasn't just betrayal, it was corporate erasure, and she had done it with surgical precision. But she didn't realize one thing. I had built the system she now sought to manipulate. I knew every blind spot, every timestamp, every obscure clause in the employee handbook, and I had been patient. For the first time in months, I felt the edge of anger sharpen into something I could use. I left her office that day, carrying the envelope like a fragile bomb. Every step through the polished marble hallway felt measured, deliberate. The sunlight bouncing off the glass walls created streaks across the floor that I followed with my eyes, almost hypnotically, tracing patterns that reminded me of the permission logs I had spent years perfecting. Lines of authority, invisible yet binding, guiding every action within the company. Once at my desk, I sat down, the swivel chair groaning under me. I opened the drawer and took out a small notebook I kept hidden, a habit, really, from years of documenting irregularities and edge cases, the minutiae nobody else noticed. I flipped it open to a fresh page and started writing, almost automatically, as if the pen itself understood the gravity of what I was about to do. Evelyn thinks she can erase me. She thinks that by paying me off and silencing me, the system she built me to enforce will bend to her whims. She doesn't realize she's about to play a game where the rules are mine. I paused, listening. The faint hum of the server room filters through the floorboards. The cameras in the compliance wing capture everything, but I knew their blind spots. Between the badge reader and the scanner, just enough space for a manual override. Tiny, seemingly insignificant details, but every exploit I could use had to be surgical. I began mapping it out mentally, breaking down every element I could leverage. The internal memo accusing me, Calibri 11 PT, headers misaligned, missing digital watermark. It screamed forged, but only to someone who knew what to look for. Security cameras recording on 14-day loops. I could seed activity, knowing the logs would roll over, but not before the right evidence surfaced. Employee Handbook, page 214, paragraph 3, subsection C, the golden clause. Any executive authorized alteration of compliance logs during an active audit window constitutes willful misrepresentation regardless of intent. She had violated this. She didn't even realize it. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes. Anger bubbled up, sharp, hot, but carefully contained. It would have been easy to storm into HR, shout, make demands. That would have been satisfying in the short term, but it wouldn't guarantee justice. It would have made me look like the disgruntled spouse, the angry former executive. No, this had to be smarter, cleaner, surgical. I thought about the routine compliance health packets I submitted every quarter. Every checkbox, every log, every timestamp, meticulously verified. What if I used those packets to feed the system itself, to highlight the violations she had planted against me? I smiled, almost imperceptibly. Yes, that was it. I wouldn't have to blow the whistle. I wouldn't confront her directly. I would let the system, our system, the one I built, speak for me. Over the next week, I worked with a calm obsession. Every morning I arrived early, sipping black coffee while the building still smelled of floor polish and recycled air. I reviewed my personal log archive stored off-network, verifying timestamps down to the second. I created duplicate versions of key compliance packets, embedding subtle integrity checks that would trigger alerts post-departure. Every forged memo she had issued was cross-linked with her executive credentials, invisible to casual review, but undeniable to the system I had architected. At home, I maintained appearances. I smiled when Evelyn passed by in the kitchen, serving herself espresso from the machine she insisted on installing in the corner of our open-plan living space. I nodded when she mentioned board matters. I laughed at the right moments. She didn't suspect that every word, every step, every keystroke I made was part of a meticulous choreography designed to bring her crashing down. I took micronotes in my hidden notebook, not the kind anyone would understand, but detailed enough that if anyone else were to look later, the plan would read like a masterclass in quiet revenge. Tuesday, 8:25 a.m. Verify integrity checks in packet Q2 compliance. Tuesday, 9:02 a.m. Crosslink memo E45 to override from 314. Wednesday, 11:47 a.m. Seed timestamps to trigger anomaly report within 48 hours of departure. Every small task was a puzzle piece. Every detail mattered, from font types to server cache clearing intervals. Even the angle of my desk lamp mattered. I wanted to be able to trace my hand movements later if necessary, to prove no tampering occurred on my side.
By the end of that week, the plan was airtight. I had every trigger in place, every loophole exploited, every subtle misstep by her woven into a trap that would not require me to lift a finger once I was gone. And then came the final day before my departure. I walked through the office one last time, observing everything like a hawk. The executive floor smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant. The cameras, 4 in a perfect square around the server access area, captured every angle. I noted the blind spot one last time, the exact space between scanner and badge reader. I left the building as if nothing had changed. I waved to my colleagues. I smiled. I even told a few small jokes, laughing lightly. Inside, I was calm as a still lake, but beneath the surface, the water was thrashing with a current she could never see. The envelope in my briefcase felt heavier than it had a week ago. The severance package she thought would buy my silence now felt like a ticket to freedom, not from the company, but from her control. I had accepted her terms outwardly, but inwardly I was poised. The trap was set. And then I waited. The morning I finally left the office for good, everything seemed ordinary. The sun glinted off the glass facade, cars hummed in the parking lot, and my briefcase was just heavy enough to feel significant without being cumbersome. I passed the security checkpoint, swiped my badge, and for the last time walked through that lobby knowing the exact weight of every camera angle, every sensor, every blind spot I'd memorized over the years. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My work, our work, the system I built, was about to do the talking. I had submitted my final compliance health packet the previous Friday. Everything was normal to anyone else. Checkboxes ticked, graphs aligned, logs uploaded. Routine, boring, but hidden within the packet were the seeds of the trap.
Integrity checks, tiny, almost invisible code snippets I had embedded in the packet, would automatically compare every current log against the archival version I had secretly preserved off-network. Cross-linked evidence. Every memo Evelyn had forged, every executive override she had performed to manipulate my records was tied back to her credentials. Any attempt to deny it would show her digital signature as the origin. Automated escalations. Once the system detected discrepancies, which I knew it would thanks to her own heavy-handed manipulation, it would automatically notify 3 entities: Board Audit Committee, External Regulatory Oversight, Internal Legal Counsel. No whistleblowing needed, no confrontation. The system would do the work, and I'd be legally insulated. By Tuesday morning, the first alerts pinged. I wasn't there to see them, but I knew the moment they went off. The tiny green lights on the dashboard that I had once monitored hourly would flash in sequence, silently spelling out the truth. 2 days later, the board convened an emergency meeting. I wasn't present. They had called it after automated alerts highlighted executive interference during an active audit period. Evelyn entered the room first, confident. She smiled at the board members, a practiced gesture meant to convey calm and control. But when the live dashboard activated on the central screen, everything changed in an instant. Every alteration she had made, every forged memo, every unauthorized override, all replayed in forensic detail. Each action time-stamped, each digital signature intact. There was no disputing it. The Compliance Counsel, an austere woman with a voice like tempered steel, read aloud the critical clause from the handbook. Page 214, paragraph 3, subsection C. Any executive authorized alteration of compliance logs during an active audit window constitutes willful misrepresentation regardless of intent. Evelyn's eyes widened. Her jaw tightened. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Every board member stared at her in silent shock, the dashboard lighting up the truth like a spotlight on stage. The cameras I had once observed from my office now seemed irrelevant. My trap didn't need them. It needed only time, precision, and her own hubris. For the first time, she realized what had happened. I hadn't confronted her. I hadn't sent an anonymous tip. I hadn't even spoken a word to the board. I had simply allowed the system, our system, to operate exactly as designed. And it had exposed her. Within hours, the consequences cascaded. Evelyn Crow, immediate termination with cause. Regulatory investigations launched. Severance clawed back. Her credibility, painstakingly cultivated over decades, evaporated in a matter of hours. Industry-wide whispers ensured that future employment would be near impossible. Daniel Crow, legally insulated, my reputation intact, severance retained. External firms contacted me for consulting work, now aware of the depth of my expertise and the ingenuity of my approach. I had not only survived, I had reclaimed the authorship and control of the system she had tried to erase me from. I watched the news feed later that night. Board statements, regulatory filings, quiet murmurs in the financial press. It wasn't a public spectacle, but the world of corporate compliance is a small one. Everyone who mattered already knew. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat by the window. The city lights reflected in the glass, tiny constellations of a world I had navigated so carefully. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a deep exhale. Justice hadn't been violent, it hadn't been loud, but it had been absolute. I realized something essential that night. Revenge doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it's about mastery, patience, and using the rules to your advantage. It's about letting the truth, meticulously documented and mechanically unavoidable, speak louder than anger ever could. Have you ever worked in a place where someone thought they could erase you, or worse, undermine everything you built? What did you do? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you want more stories where calculated intelligence meets poetic justice in the workplace, subscribe and hit the bell icon, because sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous and the most satisfying.